The stagecoach rattled into Bozeman, Montana on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, carrying a woman who would change everything. Though Deputy Marshal Dillon Parker did not know it yet, as he stood on the dusty Main Street watching the arrival with disinterested eyes. The stage door opened, and a slender figure emerged, her dark traveling dress covered in trail dust, a worn carpetbag clutched in gloved hands that trembled just slightly. She was beautiful despite the exhaustion etched into her features, with auburn hair escaping from beneath a modest bonnet and eyes the color of storm clouds that darted nervously from building to building as though cataloging escape routes. Dillon tipped his hat out of habit, a courtesy his mother had drilled into him before she passed, and returned his attention to the wanted posters he had been reviewing. At 26 years old, he had been wearing a badge for 4 years now, ever since the previous marshal had taken a bullet during a bank robbery. The job suited him well enough. He was good with a gun, better with his fists, and patient enough to track a man across 3 territories if necessary. His brown hair needed cutting, falling nearly to his collar, and his jaw was shadowed with stubble after 2 days of riding patrol through the surrounding ranchland. He was tired, dusty, and looking forward to a hot meal at the boarding house where he rented a room. The woman from the stagecoach walked past him with quick, nervous steps, her eyes fixed on the ground. Something about her movement caught his attention, the way she held herself too carefully, like someone trying desperately not to draw notice. He had seen it before in men running from something. His lawman instincts stirred, but he pushed them down. Not every nervous traveler was a criminal. Maybe she was just tired from the journey. She stopped at the Mercantile, spoke briefly with old Samuel Wright who ran the place, then continued down the street toward the church. Dillon watched her go, frowning slightly. The Reverend's wife had mentioned something about a mail-order bride arriving for Thomas Henderson, one of the ranchers who lived about 10 miles outside of town. Henderson was a decent enough man, a widower of 3 years who needed help with his young daughter. If this woman was his bride, she would have a hard life ahead of her. Ranch work was not easy, and Henderson's spread was isolated. Dillon dismissed the thought and headed toward the saloon, not for whiskey but because the owner, Marcus, always had fresh coffee brewing and the latest gossip. Information was currency in his line of work, and Marcus heard everything that mattered in Bozeman. Inside the dim interior, Dillon found his friend leaning against the bar, polishing glasses with a rag that had seen better days. Marcus was a former cavalryman who had lost his left leg at Little Bighorn 2 years prior. He had bought the saloon with his Army pension and turned it into the most profitable establishment in town, despite his young age of 28. "That Henderson's bride?" Marcus asked without preamble, nodding toward the window. "Reckon so," Dillon said, accepting the cup of coffee Marcus poured. "Looked scared as a rabbit. Can you blame her? Coming all this way to marry a stranger takes courage or desperation." Dillon considered that as he sipped the bitter brew, or both. They talked of other things, the upcoming territorial elections, the trouble with rustlers in the North Valley, the new schoolteacher who was causing quite a stir among the unmarried men. Dillon was nursing his second cup when Thomas Henderson burst through the saloon doors, his weathered face flushed with anger. "She is gone," Henderson declared loudly enough that the handful of afternoon drinkers turned to stare. "That woman took one look at me and ran like the devil himself was chasing her." Dillon set down his cup carefully. "What happened, Thomas?" The rancher was a stocky man of 42, graying at the temples, with the permanent squint of someone who spent his life outdoors. He was not handsome, but he was not ugly either, just worn down by hard work and harder grief. I met her at the church like we arranged. Reverend Williams was going to perform the ceremony right there. She took one look at me, went white as fresh snow, and bolted. Just ran. I tried to follow, but she disappeared between the buildings. What kind of woman does that? The scared kind, Marcus observed mildly. Henderson glared at him. I paid good money for her passage. We had an arrangement. Dillon stood, settling his hat back on his head. I will look for her. She cannot have gotten far in this heat without water or supplies. Arrest her, Henderson demanded. She is a thief. I want my money back. Cannot arrest someone for changing their mind about marriage, Thomas. But I will find her and talk to her. Maybe there has been a misunderstanding. Henderson muttered something unflattering but nodded, stomping back out into the afternoon sun. Dillon followed at a more measured pace, his eyes already scanning the street. A woman alone, without money or provisions, in a town she did not know. She would need help soon, whether she wanted it or not. He checked the boarding house first, the hotel, then the livery stable. No one had seen her since she disappeared from the church. Dillon widened his search, moving through the alleys and checking behind the larger buildings. Bozeman was growing with nearly 1,000 residents now, but it was still small enough that a stranger would stand out. He found her an hour later, huddled behind the feed store, her face buried in her hands. She was crying, quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. Dillon approached slowly, making sure his boots made noise on the hard, packed earth so he would not startle her. "Madam," he said gently, "you cannot stay here. Sun will be setting soon and it gets cold fast up here in the mountains." She looked up, those gray eyes wide with fear when she saw the badge pinned to his vest. "Please," she whispered, "please just let me go." "Where would you go?" He kept his voice calm, non-threatening. "You have no horse, no supplies. Nearest town is 30 miles south, and that is rough country." "I will manage." She stood, swaying slightly. "When had she last eaten?" "I am sure you would try," Dillon said. "But I would prefer not to find you dead of exposure or worse in a few days. Come on. Let me buy you a meal and we can talk." "I cannot marry him," she said desperately. "I cannot." "I know," I agreed, "but I cannot do it." "Then you will not," Dillon said simply, "but you still need to eat." She studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, hunger and exhaustion won out. She nodded. The boarding house dining room was quiet at this hour, between lunch and dinner. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, raised an eyebrow at Dillon's dusty companion but brought food without comment. The woman, who still had not offered her name, ate with the controlled desperation of someone who had been hungry for a while. Dillon waited patiently, working his way through his own plate of beef and potatoes. When she finally pushed her plate away, some color had returned to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will find a way to repay you." "What is your name?" Dillon asked. She hesitated, then said, "Grace. Grace Norton." "Well, Miss Norton, I am Dillon Parker, Deputy Marshal, and before you panic again, I am not going to arrest you for running out on Henderson." "Like I told him, cannot arrest someone for changing their mind." "He paid for my passage," Grace said, guilt flickering across her face. "That was not right of me." "Why did you run?" She looked away, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "I saw him and I could not go through with it. I thought I could, but when the moment came, I realized I would be trapped. Again." There was a story there, Dillon thought, but he did not push. "What will you do now?" "I do not know." Her voice was small. "I have a little money, enough for a few days. Maybe I can find work. I am good with numbers, and I can read and write well. Perhaps someone needs a clerk or bookkeeper." Dillon doubted it. Bozeman was not so large that it had many such positions, and the few that existed were already filled. She could probably find work as a laundress or serving girl, but that would barely keep her fed and housed. "You can stay here tonight," he said, making a decision. Mrs. Patterson has rooms and I will cover it. Tomorrow we can figure something out. Why are you helping me?" Grace asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. "Because it is the right thing to do," Dillon said, "and because you look like someone running from something worse than poverty." Her face went carefully blank, which told him everything he needed to know. He stood, tipping his hat. "Get some rest, Miss Norton. Things will look better in the morning." He paid Mrs. Patterson for the meal and a room, ignoring the knowing look the older woman gave him. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Dillon made his way to his own room above the general store, his mind turning over the puzzle of Grace Norton. She was educated, that much was clear from her speech and manners. She was running from something, someone maybe. And she was desperate enough to have traveled hundreds of miles to marry a stranger, yet too frightened to go through with it when the moment came. None of it sat right. He spent a restless night, waking at every sound. Just after midnight, his instincts proved right. He heard the unmistakable sound of horses, several of them, riding hard into town. Dillon was at his window instantly, peering down at the street. 5 men on horseback, dusty and armed, pulled up in front of the hotel. Even in the moonlight, Dillon could see they were not cowboys or drifters. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover all exits. Lawmen, but not local. Dillon dressed quickly, strapping on his gun belt. By the time he reached the street, the men were dismounting. Their leader was a tall man with iron gray hair and a U.S. Marshal badge gleaming on his chest. "Evening," Dillon said evenly. "Little late for travel." The marshal turned, his eyes cold as winter ice. "Deputy, I am Marshal Richard Thornton out of Kansas. We are looking for a fugitive, a woman, Grace Norton. We have reason to believe she arrived here today." Dillon's stomach tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "What is she wanted for?" "Murder," Thornton said flatly. "She killed a man in Dodge City 6 weeks ago, stabbed him in the back and fled. We have been tracking her ever since." The other men had fanned out, watching the buildings. They looked tired but determined. Dillon thought fast. "I saw a woman matching that description get off the stage this afternoon. She was supposed to marry Thomas Henderson but ran off. I have not seen her since." It was not quite a lie. He had not seen Grace since leaving her at the boarding house hours ago. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "You searched for her." "Some," Dillon admitted. "Henderson was upset about losing his mail-order bride, but I had other duties. I figured she would turn up when she got hungry enough." "We will search the town," Thornton said. It was not a request. Dillon nodded slowly. "It is late. Most folks are sleeping. Might be better to wait until morning, do it proper. We have been chasing her for 6 weeks, Deputy. We are not waiting anymore." There was no arguing with that tone. Dillon watched as the marshals began their search, moving efficiently from building to building. They would reach the boarding house eventually. He had maybe an hour. He waited until they were focused on the far end of town, then slipped through the shadows toward Mrs. Patterson's place. The back door was unlocked, as he knew it would be. The old woman never locked it, said if someone wanted in badly enough they would get in anyway. Grace's room was on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right. Dillon climbed the stairs silently and knocked softly. No answer. He tried the handle and found it unlocked. Inside, the room was empty, the bed unslept in. The window stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. She had run again. Dillon looked out the window and saw the trellis she must have used to climb down. Smart woman. But where would she go? The marshals were blocking all the main routes out of town. He thought about the lay of the land, the places someone could hide. The old mine, perhaps, or one of the abandoned homesteads to the north. Then another thought struck him. His own room above the general store. The back stairs were hidden from the street, and no one would think to look for her there. It was a gamble, but his instincts told him Grace was not a murderer, or at least not the cold-blooded killer Thornton described. There was more to this story. Dillon made his way back through the shadows, avoiding the searching marshals. Sure enough, when he climbed the back stairs to his room, he found his door slightly ajar. He pushed it open slowly. Grace was standing by the window, a kitchen knife clutched in her hand. She spun when he entered, the blade coming up. "Easy," Dillon said, raising his hands. "How did you know to come here? I saw you from my window, saw you watching those men. I knew they had come for me." Her voice shook, but the knife remained steady. "You are going to turn me in." "If I was going to do that, I would have already told Thornton where you were staying," Dillon pointed out. He closed the door behind him and locked it. "Put the knife down, Grace. We need to talk, and we do not have much time." She did not lower the blade. "They told you I am a murderer. They told me you killed someone in Dodge City, stabbed him in the back." Dillon kept his voice level. "Is it true?" Grace's face contorted with emotion. Pain, anger, and something that looked like shame. "Yes," she whispered. "I killed him, but it was not murder, it was survival." "Tell me," Dillon said. The knife wavered. "Why should you believe me?" "Because I am asking. Because I could have already handed you over, but I did not. Because something about this whole situation does not add up." He took a slow step forward. "Tell me what happened." Grace stared at him for a long moment, then slowly lowered the knife. She sank onto the edge of his bed, her whole body trembling. "His name was Walter Norton, my husband. You were married to him. For 2 years, Grace said bitterly. 2 years of hell. He was charming at first when he courted me in St. Louis. My father had just died, left me alone with some small inheritance. Walter was handsome, attentive. By the time I realized what he truly was, it was too late." Dillon sat in the chair across from her, listening intently. "He was cruel," Grace continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just with words, though those were bad enough. He hit me, regularly, and when he drank, which was often, it was worse. I tried to leave twice. The first time, he found me within a day, and the beating I received put me in bed for a week. The second time, he broke my arm." She pushed up the sleeve of her dress, revealing a scar on her forearm. Even in the dim lamplight, Dillon could see it had healed crooked. "I stopped trying after that," Grace said. "I just endured. And then he got involved with some cattle rustlers in Kansas. We ended up in Dodge City, and he started drinking more, gambling away what money we had. One night he came home drunk and angrier than I had ever seen him. He had lost badly at cards. He blamed me, said I was bad luck, that he should have never married me." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "He had his hands around my throat. I could not breathe. I was going to die, I knew it. There was a letter opener on the table beside me. I grabbed it and I stabbed him with it. I did not think, I just acted. And then he was on the floor and there was so much blood." Tears streamed down her face now. "I should have stayed, explained it to the sheriff. But Walter had friends, men who would have lied for him. Men who would have said I was the violent one, that I was unstable. I panicked and I ran. I used what little money I had to buy passage west, changed my name back to my maiden name. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, I thought maybe I could start over, far enough away that no one would find me." Dillon absorbed all of this, his jaw tight. He had seen men like Walter Norton, bullies who hid behind badges of respectability while terrorizing those weaker than themselves. And he knew how the law often failed women in such situations. A man could beat his wife with little consequence, but a woman who fought back was a murderess. "That is self-defense," he said finally. "Not murder." Grace laughed bitterly. "Tell that to Marshal Thornton. Walter had friends in Dodge City, influential friends. They made sure the warrant read murder, not manslaughter or self-defense. And even if I could prove what he did to me, even if I had witnesses, which I do not, I would still hang. You know how this works. A wife who kills her husband, even in defense of her own life, rarely receives mercy. She was right, and they both knew it. The law was supposed to be blind, but in practice it rarely was, especially when it came to women. "They are searching the town," Dillon said. "They will be thorough. We have maybe until dawn before they search every building, including this one." "Then I need to run," Grace said, standing. "I will head into the mountains, try to lose them in the wilderness." "You will die out there," Dillon said bluntly. "You have no supplies, no horse, no knowledge of the terrain. There are grizzlies in those mountains, not to mention wolves and weather that can turn deadly without warning." "Then what do you suggest?" Grace asked desperately. "Because I am not going back to hang for defending my own life." Dillon stood as well, his mind racing through possibilities. He could hide her here, but that was only temporary. Thornton would not give up easily. He could try to fight the legal battle, but that would take time and money, neither of which they had. Or, "We run," he said. Grace stared at him. "What, we run?" Dillon repeated, the plan forming even as he spoke. "I know this country. I know where we can go, places Thornton will never find you. We leave now before dawn, before they finish searching." "You are a lawman," Grace said, incredulous. "You cannot just run. You would be abandoning your duty, throwing away everything." "My duty is to uphold justice," Dillon said firmly. "And there is no justice in you hanging for defending yourself, as for throwing away everything." He looked around his sparse room at the life he had built here. It was not much. A job, some acquaintances, a rented room. No family, no ties that truly bound him. "I have nothing here worth keeping." "You do not even know me," Grace protested. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Dillon met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve a chance at life, at freedom. And because I have seen enough injustice, wearing a badge, to know that sometimes the law and justice are not the same thing." They stared at each other in the lamplight, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Outside, they could hear the marshals moving through the street, the sound of doors opening and closing as the search continued. "If we do this," Grace said slowly, "they will hunt you too. You will be a fugitive. I know. You could lose everything. Your reputation, your career, possibly your life. I know that too." "Why?" Grace asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for me?" Dillon thought about it, about the answer she needed to hear and the truth he was only beginning to understand himself. "Because the first time I saw you step off that stage, I saw someone who needed help. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth saving. And because maybe I am tired of being the law when the law is wrong." Grace closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "If we run together, we run as partners. I will not be some helpless woman you have to protect. I will pull my weight, take my share of the risk." "Agreed," Dillon said. "And if they catch us, I will not let you hang for my sake. I will tell them you were just doing your job, that I forced you somehow." "They would not believe that," Dillon said with a hint of amusement. "But I appreciate the thought." Grace opened her eyes and looked at him with something like wonder. "You are serious? You are really going to throw away your life for me?" "I am really going to help you save yours," Dillon corrected. "The rest we will figure out as we go. Now we need to move fast. Gather whatever you have. We leave in 10 minutes. They moved with swift efficiency. Dillon packed light, just essential supplies, his rifle, ammunition, and what money he had saved. Grace had even less, just the clothes on her back and her small carpet bag. Dillon added blankets, food from his small store, a canteen of water. "Where will we go?" Grace asked as they prepared to leave. "North, into the high country. There are valleys up there where a person could disappear for months, years even. Trappers use them sometimes, but mostly they are empty. We can survive there while we figure out our next move." "Winter comes early in the mountains," Grace said. "We will deal with that when we have to. Right now, we focus on getting away clean." They slipped out the back stairs just as the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The stable was quiet, the stable boy still asleep. Dillon saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and added a second horse, a mare he knew belonged to the livery owner. He would find a way to pay him back later. They led the horses out the back way, avoiding the main street where the marshals were still searching. Once clear of town, they mounted up and rode north at a steady pace, not fast enough to leave an obvious trail but quick enough to put distance between them and Bozeman. The sun was fully up by the time they reached the foothills, the town a small smudge behind them. Dillon glanced back once, then focused ahead. There was no going back now. They rode in silence for hours, following game trails and creek beds that would hide their tracks. Dillon watched their back trail constantly, looking for signs of pursuit. Grace rode well, he noted, sitting her horse with practiced ease. There was much he did not know about her yet, but they had time now. All the time in the world, assuming they stayed ahead of Thornton. It was midday when they stopped to rest the horses and eat. They were deep in the mountains now, surrounded by towering pines and steep granite cliffs. The air was thinner here, cooler despite the August sun. Grace dismounted stiffly, stretching her back. "How far have we come?" "Maybe 20 miles, Dillon estimated. "We will cover another 20 before dark. Tomorrow we will be deep enough in that they will not find us easily." "You really know these mountains," Grace observed. "Spent 2 years up here before I took the badge," Dillon said. "Trapping, hunting, living off the land." "It is hard living, but it is free." "Free," Grace repeated softly. "I had almost forgotten what that felt like." They ate jerky and hardtack, washing it down with cold creek water. Dillon studied Grace in the daylight, really looking at her for the first time. She was younger than he had initially thought, maybe 24 or 25. Her hands showed signs of hard work despite her educated speech. There was strength in her, a core of steel beneath the fear. "Tell me about yourself," Grace said suddenly. "I know your name and your occupation, but who is Dillon Parker really?" Dillon considered the question. "Not much to tell. I was born in Texas, grew up on a ranch. My father died when I was 15, got thrown from a horse. My mother passed 2 years later from fever. I drifted for a while, did some ranch work, some scouting for the Army. Ended up in Bozeman 4 years ago and got deputized when they needed help. That is about it. No wife, no sweetheart waiting for you. No, never found the right woman, I guess. Or maybe I never stopped long enough to look properly." He met her eyes. "What about you? Before Walter, what was your life like?" Grace smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a clerk for a shipping company. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. He believed in education, made sure I could read and write and cipher. I loved books, still do. I thought I might become a teacher someday." "You still could," Dillon said. "Out here in the territories, settlements are always looking for educated people. When things settle down, when we are far enough away, you could teach again." "Maybe," Grace said, but there was hope in her voice now, fragile but real. They rode on through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The landscape grew more rugged, the trees thicker. This was wild country, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Dillon was in his element here, reading the land with practiced ease, but he could see Grace struggling with the altitude and the pace. They made camp that night in a small clearing beside a rushing stream. Dillon built a fire, small and smokeless, and they ate a simple meal. The temperature dropped sharply as darkness fell and they huddled close to the flames. "I never properly thanked you," Grace said quietly, "for what you are doing. I do not have the words." "You do not need words," Dillon said. "Just do not make me regret it by dying on me out here." She laughed, a soft sound. "I will do my best to stay alive, though I make no promises about not complaining about saddle sores." They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives, building something between them that was part trust, part understanding, and part something else neither was ready to name yet. When they finally bedded down, laying their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Dillon found himself listening to Grace's breathing, making sure she was warm enough, safe enough. Something had shifted in him today, some fundamental change he could not quite explain. He had walked away from everything he knew for a woman he barely knew, and yet it felt right in a way nothing else in his life ever had. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They broke camp quickly and continued north, following the spine of the mountains. Around midday, Dillon heard something that made him signal for silence. Horses, several of them, somewhere behind and below. "They are tracking us," Grace said, fear sharp in her voice. "Maybe," Dillon said. "Or it could be hunters, trappers. We will not take chances, though. Come on." He led them off the trail and into thick timber, moving slowly to avoid leaving obvious signs. They traveled this way for hours, zigzagging through the forest, crossing streams multiple times to hide their scent from any tracking dogs. It was exhausting work, especially for the horses, but necessary. By nightfall, they had put significant distance between themselves and whoever was following. They made a cold camp that night, no fire, eating dried food and shivering under their blankets. "How long will we have to run?" Grace asked in the darkness. "I do not know," Dillon admitted. "Thornton struck me as the stubborn type. He might follow for days, weeks even, or he might give up once we are deep enough in. Hard to say." "I am sorry I brought this on you. You did not bring anything on me. I made my own choice." He could not see her face in the darkness, but he could hear the guilt in her voice. "Grace, listen to me. I do not regret this. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you survived 2 years of hell and you are still fighting. I know you are brave enough to stab a man who was trying to kill you and smart enough to run when you had to. I know you rode 20 miles today without complaint, despite being exhausted and scared. That is enough for me." Silence stretched between them, filled with the night sounds of the forest. Then Grace said softly, "I think you might be the best man I have ever met, Dillon Parker." He had no answer to that, so he said nothing. But something warm settled in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. They traveled for 3 more days, always pushing north and west, deeper into the wilderness. The terrain grew more difficult, the trails less defined. They saw no more signs of pursuit, but Dillon remained cautious. Thornton could be anywhere. On the 5th day, they reached the valley Dillon had been aiming for. It was a hidden gem, a high mountain meadow surrounded by steep cliffs, accessible only through a narrow pass that would be easy to defend. A stream cut through the center, and there were the remains of an old cabin near the tree line. "We will stay here for a while," Dillon said. "Rest, resupply, figure out our next move." The cabin was in rough shape but structurally sound. They spent the afternoon cleaning it out and making basic repairs. Grace proved surprisingly handy, helping to replace broken boards and patch holes in the roof. By evening, they had created something resembling livable shelter. That night, sitting by a proper fire inside the cabin, Grace said, "We cannot run forever. I know. Eventually we will have to stop somewhere, build a real life. Unless you plan to live like hermits up here permanently." Dillon poked at the fire. "There are places we could go. California, maybe, or Oregon. far enough away that Thornton's warrant does not reach. We could start over, new names, new lives. You would do that. Give up being a lawman entirely, live under a false name. I already gave up being a lawman the moment I helped you escape. As for a false name, what is in a name anyway? I would still be me. Grace studied him across the fire. You are remarkable, do you know that? I am just doing what needs doing. No, Grace said firmly. Most men would have turned me in without a second thought, or demanded something in return for their help. But you, she shook her head, you are helping me for no reason other than it is right. That is remarkable. Dillon felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that is not true. They fell into silence, but it was comfortable now, the silence of two people learning to be at ease with each other. Over the next several days, they settled into a routine. Dillon hunted and fished while Grace managed the camp, cooked meals, and continued improving the cabin. They talked for hours each evening, sharing more of their lives, their hopes, their fears. Dillon learned that Grace loved poetry, could recite Wordsworth and Keats from memory, that she had a talent for drawing and had once dreamed of seeing the ocean, that she was stronger than she looked, both physically and mentally, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. Grace learned that Dillon was quieter than he seemed at first, that he thought deeply about things before speaking, that he played a battered harmonica he carried in his pack and was surprisingly good at it, that he was patient and kind, but with a core of steel when it came to protecting those he cared about, that he cared about her specifically, more than he probably should. Neither of them spoke about the growing attraction between them, the way their hands would brush and linger when passing items, the way their eyes would meet and hold across the fire. It was too soon, too complicated. They were fugitives, living day to day with no guarantee of tomorrow. And yet the feelings grew anyway, stubborn as weeds and twice as hard to ignore. 2 weeks after they arrived at the valley, Grace was washing clothes in the stream when Dillon came running from the tree line, his face urgent. "Someone is coming," he said quietly. 3 riders coming up through the pass. Grace went pale. "Thornton, maybe. Get inside the cabin and stay down. I will handle this." "Dillon, please, Grace, just trust me." She nodded and hurried to the cabin. Dillon positioned himself near the pass, his rifle ready but not raised. He did not want to start a fight if this was innocent travelers, but he would not let anyone threaten Grace either. The riders emerged from the pass slowly, hands visible and empty of weapons. As they got closer, Dillon relaxed slightly. Not marshals. These were Indians, Crow by the look of their dress, 2 men and 1 woman. The lead rider, an older man with gray streaking his long hair, raised a hand in greeting. "We mean no harm," he called in accented English. "We saw smoke, came to see who camps in our hunting grounds." Dillon lowered his rifle but did not put it away. "Just passing through, we will be gone soon." The older man studied him with shrewd eyes. "You run from something, from someone. We see you come through pass 5 days back, see you cover tracks, act like hunted thing." There was no point in lying. "Yes, we are running, but we have done no harm, taken nothing that was not ours. We just want to be left in peace." The 3 Crow conversed in their own language. Finally, the older man nodded. "We are Red Cloud's band. We hunt these mountains when white man's soldiers let us. We do not care about white man's law. If you stay quiet, do not hunt our valleys, we will not speak of you to anyone." It was more than Dillon could have hoped for. "Thank you. We will stay clear of your hunting grounds." Red Cloud nodded again, then surprised Dillon by asking, "The woman you protect, she is your wife?" "No," Dillon said, then reconsidered. "Not yet." Something that might have been amusement crossed Red Cloud's weathered face. A woman worth running for is a woman worth keeping. You protect her well. These mountains are not safe for those who do not know them. Winter comes in 6 weeks, maybe 7. You cannot stay here when snow falls. I know. We will move on before then. Go west, Red Cloud advised. Beyond the big mountains. White settlements there do not ask many questions. You could find peace there. They talked a while longer. Red Cloud's band left 2 rabbits as a gift, a gesture of goodwill, and departed as quietly as they had come. Dillon watched them go, then returned to the cabin where Grace was peering anxiously out the window. They were friendly, Dillon assured her, and they will not betray us. But Red Cloud was right about one thing. We cannot stay here through winter. These mountains will kill us when the snows come. Then we move on, Grace said. Where? Oregon, I think, or maybe Northern California, far from Kansas, far from Thornton, somewhere we can start over properly. Grace nodded slowly. When? Soon. Another week to rest and prepare, then we go. That night as they sat by the fire, Grace said quietly, Red Cloud called me your wife. He assumed, Dillon said, suddenly awkward. I did not correct him. What did you tell him? That you were not my wife. Not yet. Grace looked at him, her gray eyes reflecting the firelight. Not yet. That implies you think I might be someday. Dillon met her gaze steadily. I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks and under the worst circumstances. But yes, I think about it. About a future where you are not just someone I am protecting, but someone I am sharing my life with. If that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize. It does not make me uncomfortable, Grace said softly. It terrifies me, but not because I do not want it, because I do. Because in a few weeks, you have shown me more kindness, more respect, more care than Walter did in 2 years. Because when I look at you, I see a future I never thought I could have. And that terrifies me because I am still running, still a fugitive, and I have no right to drag you further into my mess. You are not dragging me anywhere, Dillon said. I am walking this path by choice, and as for your mess, it is our mess now. We face it together. Grace stood and crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair. You said together. Do you mean that? I mean it. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. Then maybe not yet does not have to be so far in the future after all. Dillon covered her hands with his own. Grace, are you sure? After everything you have been through, I do not want to push you into anything. You are not pushing. I am choosing. I am choosing you, choosing us, choosing a future I want to fight for. She smiled, tremulous but genuine. Unless you are having second thoughts. Not a single one, Dillon said and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and exploring, 2 people learning each other with care and patience. When they finally pulled apart, Grace was crying, but she was smiling too. I did not think I would ever feel safe enough to do that, she whispered. To want that, thank you. You do not have to thank me for kissing you, Dillon said, brushing her tears away with his thumb. I am not thanking you for the kiss. I am thanking you for making me feel like I am worth kissing, worth loving, worth saving. You are, Dillon said fiercely. You are worth all of that and more. They spent that night talking, planning, dreaming of a future that seemed more possible with every passing hour. They would go to Oregon, Dillon decided, to the Willamette Valley where settlers were building new lives and asking few questions about the past. They would find land, build a home, maybe start a family if Grace wanted that. I do want that, Grace admitted. Children, I mean, I always did, even when I was married to Walter. But I was too afraid to bring a child into that situation. Now with you I can imagine it. A little boy with your eyes, maybe, or a girl with my stubbornness. God help us if we have a stubborn daughter, Dillon said with mock horror, and Grace laughed, the sound bright and free. They left the valley a week later, rested and resupplied, heading west toward Oregon. The journey would take months, especially traveling carefully to avoid notice. But they had time now, and they had each other. The trail west was long and often difficult. They crossed the Continental Divide through a high pass, descended into Idaho territory where they traded for supplies at a small trading post, and continued west toward the Snake River. Everywhere they went, they were careful. Dillon let his beard grow to change his appearance, and Grace darkened her hair with walnut juice and wore it in a different style. They traveled as Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Preston, a young couple heading west to start a farm. It was close enough to the truth that the lie came easily. And as the weeks passed, the lie became less of a lie and more of a truth they were growing into. In a small town in eastern Oregon, they found a preacher willing to marry them with no questions asked. Grace wore a simple blue dress she had bought with some of their dwindling money, and Dillon wore his cleanest shirt. There were no guests, no celebration, just the two of them and the words that bound them together. "I do not have a ring," Dillon apologized as they left the church. "I do not need one," Grace said, squeezing his hand. "I have you. That is more than enough." They spent their wedding night in a small hotel room, nervous and tentative with each other. Grace was frightened at first, the memories of Walter's brutality too close to the surface. But Dillon was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace, showing her that intimacy could be about love and trust rather than pain and control. Afterward, lying in his arms, Grace said softly, "I never knew it could be like that. Thank you for being patient with me." "Always," Dillon promised, kissing her forehead. "We have all the time in the world now." They continued west, finally reaching the Willamette Valley in late October. The land was everything Red Cloud had promised, fertile and green, with mild weather and welcoming settlers. They found a piece of unclaimed land near a small community called Junction City, and filed a homestead claim under their new names. The first winter was hard, living in a hastily built cabin that was barely more than a shack, working to clear land and prepare for spring planting. But they were together, and they were free, and that made every hardship bearable. Spring came, and with it new beginnings. Grace planted a garden while Dillon worked the fields, breaking ground for crops. Their nearest neighbors, a family named Morrison, were friendly and helpful, teaching them the tricks of farming in the valley. No one asked about their past, and they volunteered nothing. In July, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Dillon one evening as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said, wonder and fear mixing in her voice. Dillon pulled her close, his heart so full he could barely speak. "A baby. Grace, that is." "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Grace admitted. "But yes, I am happy, so happy. Are you?" "I am the happiest man alive," Dillon said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Their son was born the following March, during a rainstorm that lasted 3 days. Grace labored for 12 hours with only Dillon and Mrs. Morrison to help, but when it was over, they had a healthy, squalling boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. "What should we name him?" Grace asked, exhausted but radiant as she held their son. "You choose," Dillon said. "You did all the hard work." Grace thought for a moment. David Preston, it means beloved." "David," Dillon repeated, touching his son's tiny hand with one finger. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." Life settled into a routine of sorts. The farm prospered, they made friends in the community, and their family grew. 2 years after David, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, and 3 years after that, another son they called Matthew. Through it all, there was always the shadow of the past, the fear that someday Marshal Thornton would appear and shatter everything they had built. But as the years passed and no one came, the fear faded to a distant worry. They never spoke of Kansas, of Dodge City, of the man Grace had killed in self-defense. That life belonged to different people, Grace Norton and Deputy Marshal Dillon Parker, who had ceased to exist that August night in Bozeman, Montana. Daniel and Grace Preston were simple farmers, devoted to each other and their children, respected members of their community. They attended church on Sundays, helped their neighbors at harvest time, and slowly built a good life from the ashes of their past. Sometimes on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Grace would look at Dillon and say, "Do you ever regret it, giving up everything for me?" And Dillon would pull her close and answer, "I did not give up anything. I found everything that matters." It was not entirely true, of course. He had given up his career, his identity, any chance of returning east, but he had gained so much more. A wife he loved with everything he had, children who filled his days with joy and laughter, a home that was truly his. Peace of mind knowing he had done the right thing, even if the law said otherwise. In the summer of 1885, 7 years after they had fled Bozeman, a rider came to their farm. Dillon was in the fields when he saw the stranger approaching, and old instincts flared to life. He grabbed his rifle and headed for the house at a run. Grace was in the garden with Elizabeth when she saw Dillon running. She knew immediately that something was wrong. She scooped up their daughter and hurried inside, her heart pounding. The rider stopped at their gate, making no move to dismount. He was an older man, weathered and gray, with a U.S. Marshal badge on his vest, but it was not Thornton. Dillon approached carefully, rifle ready. "Can I help you, Marshal?" The man studied him with shrewd eyes. "Looking for someone." Man and a woman would have come through here 6, 7 years back. The man was a deputy from Montana, name of Dillon Parker. The woman was Grace Norton, wanted for murder in Kansas. Dillon's blood ran cold, but he kept his face neutral. "Cannot say I have heard those names. This is homestead country. Lots of people pass through." "Sure they do," the marshal said. "Thing is, Marshal Richard Thornton, the man who was chasing them, he died last year. Lung fever. Before he passed, he admitted the Norton case was not quite what it seemed. Seems the man she killed was a known abuser, had a history of beating women. Thornton knew it, but he had promised the dead man's brother, a judge, that he would bring the woman back for trial. Politics, you understand." Dillon said nothing, waiting. "After Thornton died, some of us started looking into things more carefully. Found witnesses who testified that Walter Norton bragged about hurting his wife, said she deserved it. Found a doctor who treated her for a broken arm and suspected abuse. The prosecutor in Kansas reviewed the case and declined to pursue it further. Grace Norton, if she is still alive, is no longer wanted. The charges were dropped. Relief flooded through Dillon so intensely he nearly staggered. That is good news for her, then, if she is still alive." "Indeed," the marshal said. As for Deputy Parker, there was some question about his actions, helping a fugitive flee. But given the circumstances, and given that he acted in good faith believing an injustice was being done, the decision was made not to pursue charges against him either. If he wanted to, he could return to Montana or any other territory without fear of arrest. "That is generous," Dillon managed. The marshal smiled slightly. "You are a good actor, Mr. Preston, or should I say Mr. Parker, but you need not worry, I did not come here to arrest you. I came to tell you that you are both free, officially, legally free. You can stop running now, you can stop hiding." Dillon stared at him. "How did you find us?" "I am good at my job," the marshal said simply. "And I was curious what happened to a deputy who threw away everything to save a woman he barely knew. Took me 6 months of tracking, but I found you. I will tell you what I tell everyone. I came to Junction City, asked around about settlers, and never found anyone matching the description of Dillon Parker or Grace Norton. As far as I am concerned, they disappeared into the wilderness and were probably killed by bears or weather. Daniel and Grace Preston, on the other hand, are fine, upstanding citizens and a credit to this community. Why? Dillon asked. Why do this? Because I have been a lawman for 30 years, the marshal said. And I have seen enough to know that the law is not always just, and justice is not always legal. What you did, protecting that woman, it was right even if it was not lawful. You deserve to live in peace. She deserves to live in peace. So as far as I am concerned, this case is closed. He tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away, leaving Dillon standing in his yard with tears streaming down his face. Grace came out of the house slowly, Elizabeth on her hip. What did he say? It is over, Dillon said, his voice breaking. The charges are dropped. We are free, Grace. Really free? Grace handed Elizabeth to her father and collapsed against him, sobbing with relief. They held each other for a long time, their daughter confused but patient between them, while 7 years of fear and tension finally released its hold. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch in the warm summer darkness and talked about what this meant. We could go back, Grace said. To Montana, to Missouri, we could reclaim our real names. We could, Dillon agreed. Do you want to? Grace thought about it, then shook her head. No. I think Grace Norton died 7 years ago along with Deputy Marshal Parker. Daniel and Grace Preston are who we are now. This is our home, these are our friends. I do not want to go back. I want to stay here with you, with our children, and build the rest of our lives in peace. Then that is what we will do, Dillon said, taking her hand. The years continued to pass, marked by harvests and holidays, births and birthdays. Their farm prospered and their family grew. Grace gave birth to 2 more children, twin girls they named Sarah and Rachel. David grew tall and strong, taking after his father with a quiet competence that made Dillon proud. Elizabeth was fierce and clever, reminding them both of Grace. Matthew was the joker, always making his siblings laugh, and the twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing everything. Dillon and Grace grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They never took each other for granted, never forgot how close they had come to losing everything. Every morning, Dillon woke grateful for the woman beside him. Every evening, Grace thanked God for the man who had saved her life and given her a future worth living. They became pillars of their community. Dillon served on the town council and helped mediate disputes. Grace taught reading and writing to children whose families lived too far from the schoolhouse. They helped their neighbors, raised their children with love and discipline, and built a legacy of kindness and hard work. On their 20th wedding anniversary, in the fall of 1896, their children threw them a party. All 5 were grown, or nearly so, David already married with a child of his own, Elizabeth courting a nice young man from the next farm over. The house was full of laughter and love, of grandchildren running underfoot and friends sharing stories. Late in the evening, Dillon and Grace slipped away to their porch, needing a moment of quiet. They sat in the rocking chairs they had bought years ago, holding hands as they had so many times before. 20 years, Grace marveled. Sometimes it feels like 20 minutes and sometimes like a lifetime. Both, Dillon agreed. We have lived a whole lifetime together. Do you remember the day we met? You were standing in the street in Bozeman, and I was so frightened I could barely breathe. I remember thinking you looked like someone running from something. I had no idea it would change my whole life. You changed mine first, Grace said softly. You gave me my life back. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Dillon corrected. I was just a lawman doing a job before I met you. You made me something more. You made me a husband, a father, a better man." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. After a while, Grace said, "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still do it? Would you still help me that night?" Dillon turned to look at her. This woman who had been his partner for 20 years, who had borne his children and shared his life and made every day brighter just by existing. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to him she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her step off that stagecoach. "I would do it again in a heartbeat," he said. "Every choice, every moment, I would choose you every single time." Grace smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Then we will face it together or run. That is what you said that night, is it not?" "I said I would help you face it or run. You are the one who chose together." "Best decision I ever made," Grace said. "Well, second best." The first best was getting on that stagecoach to Bozeman in the first place. Everything else just followed from there. They rocked in their chairs, hands clasped, while inside their house their children laughed and their grandchild babbled, and the life they had built together continued on. The past was settled, the future was secure, and the present was full of love. It was, Dillon thought, more than any man deserved, but exactly what he and Grace had earned together. They had faced the storm and survived. They had run when they needed to and stood firm when the time came. They had built something real and lasting from the ashes of fear and injustice. And they had done it together, just as they had promised each other all those years ago in a cramped room in Montana, when a deputy marshal decided that some laws were worth breaking and some people were worth saving. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Dillon and Grace sat in peaceful silence. Two people who had found in each other everything they had ever needed or wanted. Their story had started with fear and desperation, with flight and uncertainty, but it had become something beautiful. A testament to courage, to love, to the power of two people choosing each other against all odds, and it was far from over. There were more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch, more years to spend side by side. Grace and Dillon Preston had many chapters left to write in their shared life, each one sweeter because of the darkness they had overcome together. The night breeze picked up, carrying the scent of harvest and home. Inside, someone called for them to come back and have cake. Grace stood and offered Dillon her hand. "Ready to go back in?" she asked. Dillon took her hand and stood, pulling her close for a kiss that was as natural as breathing after 20 years of practice. "Always," he said, "as long as we face it together." Grace laughed, and they walked hand in hand back into the warm light of their home, into the embrace of their family, into the beautiful life they had fought so hard to create and would cherish until their last breath. Two people who had been strangers brought together by fate and bound by love, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest choices and the bravest leaps of faith. Their story was one of redemption and second chances, of finding love in the most unexpected places and holding on to it with both hands. It was a story that would be passed down through their family for generations, a reminder that courage and compassion can change everything, that true love is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the greatest adventure is simply choosing to face life together. And they lived happily, fully, and freely ever after.